The dim glow of neon signs flickered across the rain-slicked parking lot, casting jagged shadows on the gravel like veins of lightning frozen in time. Inside the Iron Eagle saloon, the air hung heavy with the scent of aged whiskey, leather, and the faint tang of motor oil that clung to every patron like a second skin. It was a place for the forgotten, rough men with calloused hands and eyes that had seen too much, nursing beers under the low hum of a jukebox playing forgotten rock anthems. The clock above the bar read just past midnight, but time meant little here, in this outpost on the edge of the desert highway. Then the door creaked open, letting in a gust of cool night air that carried the distant rumble of thunder. All heads turned as a young woman stepped inside, her silhouette fragile against the storm outside. She couldn't have been more than 20, her frame slight and hunched, as if the weight of the world pressed down on her shoulders. But it was her face that stopped conversations mid-sentence, scarred, the skin mottled and pulled tight in places, remnants of a fire that had stolen her youth and left behind a map of pain. She wore a faded hoodie pulled low, jeans frayed at the hems, and her hands trembled as she clutched a worn backpack like a lifeline. Whispers rippled through the room. Who is she? What's a kid like that doing in a dive like this? She scanned the bar with wide, haunted eyes, the kind that had learned to spot danger before it struck. The bikers, hardened riders from the Iron Promise crew, their vests patched with symbols of oaths sworn in blood and brotherhood, watched her with a mix of curiosity and wariness. Ethan Harlan, the club's quiet enforcer, sat at the corner table, his broad shoulders slumped over a half-empty glass. At 42, Ethan was a man carved from loss, a widow left behind in a crash he couldn't prevent, a son grown distant, and scars of his own hidden beneath ink and denim. He'd ridden with the Iron Promise for 15 years, bound by a vow made in the ashes of his old life to protect the vulnerable, no questions asked. But lately, that promise felt like a chain, pulling him back to ghosts he couldn't outrun. The girl hesitated at the threshold, rain dripping from her hood onto the scuffed wooden floor. A burly trucker at the bar snorted, his voice cutting through the murmur like gravel under tires. "Hey, sweetheart, this ain't no shelter for strays. Kitchen's closed." Laughter erupted from his buddies, crude and mocking, but the girl's chin lifted slightly, a spark of defiance flickering in her gaze. She took a step forward, her voice barely above a whisper but steady as steel. "I'm looking for someone, a man who rides with eagles on his back. He helped my family once, years ago." The room fell silent, the jukebox's twang the only sound punctuating the tension. Ethan's hand tightened around his glass. Eagles on the back, that was the Iron Promise patch, a symbol of loyalty forged in the fires of forgotten wars. He remembered fragments, a house fire in a small town, screams in the night, a promise whispered to a dying father. "Take care of them if I'm gone," the man had gasped, clutching Ethan's arm amid the smoke. Ethan had nodded, the weight of it settling like lead in his chest, but life had pulled him away. Jobs, rides, the endless road. He'd lost track, buried the oath under layers of regret. Before anyone could respond, the trucker stood, his chair scraping like a challenge. He loomed over her, breath sour with beer. "Ain't no fairy godmothers here, girl. Beat it before you get hurt." The threat hung in the air, thick as the storm clouds outside. The girl's eyes darted to the door, fear flashing across her scarred features. But she didn't move. In that moment, something shifted in the bar, a collective intake of breath, the unspoken code of the road stirring like an engine revving to life. Ethan rose slowly, his boots thudding against the floorboards. At 6'3", he was a wall of quiet strength, his graying beard framing a face etched with lines of hard-won wisdom. The crew watched him, knowing the stories. The veteran who'd pulled kids from wrecks, the brother who'd stood against crooked cops for a stranger's honor. He crossed the room in 3 strides, placing himself between the girl and the trucker without a word. "She stays," Ethan said, his voice low and gravelly, carrying the rumble of a Harley at dawn. The trucker blinked, sizing him up, but the fire in Ethan's eyes, fueled by that old, unbreakable promise, made him back down, muttering as he slunk to his stool. The girl looked up at Ethan, her breath catching. "You're him, the one from the fire. My name's Olivia. My dad. He made you swear." Tears welled in her eyes, not from fear now, but from the raw edge of relief. Ethan nodded, the pieces clicking into place. The fire had claimed her father, left her mother broken, and scattered the family like embers. Olivia's scars were a testament to that night, a reminder of survival's cruel price. "What do you need?" he asked, guiding her to a booth away from prying eyes. As she sat, unfolding her story in hushed tones, the mounting debts, the shady landlord evicting her and her ailing mother, the threats that had driven her here, Ethan felt the promise ignite anew. It wasn't just words anymore. It was a call to arms, pulling him from the numbness of his routine. The crew gathered subtly, sensing the shift. Jax, the wiry mechanic with a laugh like thunder, Lena, the tough-as-nails bartender who'd patched more wounds than a field medic, and the others, bound by the same invisible threads of loyalty. Outside, the rain pounded harder, but inside, a warmth began to spread, not from the hearth, but from hearts thawing in the face of forgotten honor. Olivia's plea wasn't for money or pity. It was for justice, for the family she'd lost, and the one she hoped to rebuild. Ethan glanced at his brothers and sisters in patches, a silent signal passing among them. This girl, marked by fire, had walked into their world and reminded them why they rode together. By morning, engines would roar and the iron promise would roll out, not for vengeance, but for redemption, to honor a vow that time couldn't erase. What started as a lone girl's desperate entry would ripple outward, drawing the crew into a web of corruption that tested every bond. But in that booth, under the flickering light, Ethan made a new promise, one that would bind them all. "You're not alone anymore." And in the eyes of the bikers watching, something melted, a hardness softened by the quiet power of standing for what was right. The rain hammered the tin roof of the Iron Eagle saloon like a relentless drumbeat, syncing with the pulse of the gathering storm outside. Inside, the booth where Ethan sat with Olivia felt like a fragile island amid the sea of leather-clad figures, now clustering closer, their shadows stretching long under the amber glow of hanging lamps. Olivia's hands, scarred and trembling, gripped the edge of the scarred wooden table as she spoke, her voice a fragile thread weaving through the low murmur of the bar. The scent of damp earth seeped in from the door. Mingling with the sharp bite of coffee, Lena had slid across the table without a word, a black mug steaming, untouched. "It started after the fire," Olivia said, her eyes fixed on the swirling patterns in the wood grain, as if pulling memories from the knots. "Dad was gone in an instant, but Mom, she fought through the smoke, got me out. The scars came later, from the hospital, from trying to fix what couldn't be fixed." She touched her cheek lightly, the skin there puckered like cooled wax, a silent testament to nights of agony, blurred into one long haze. Ethan listened, his broad frame still as stone, but inside the old vow churned like an engine idling too long, hot, insistent. That night of the blaze replayed in fragments, the acrid stench of burning timber, the father's grip like iron on his arm, the gasped words, "Swear you'll watch over them, brother, for the road we shared." Ethan had been younger then, fresh from the sands of distant conflicts, the iron promise his anchor. He'd sworn it, but the miles had piled up, burying the oath under dust and denial. Now, here she was, the living echo of that promise, her words painting a picture of quiet desperation, Mom's sick, lungs wrecked from the smoke, can't work anymore. We were scraping by in this run-down trailer on the edge of town, but the landlord, Harlan, that's his name. He owns half the properties around here. Squeezes folks dry, started hiking the rent, then the threats came, notes slipped under the door, calls in the dead of night. Said if we didn't pay up, we'd be out on the street, no mercy. Her voice cracked on the last word, and Jax, leaning against the booth's edge with arms crossed, let out a low growl. The mechanic's grease-stained fingers drummed a silent rhythm on his belt, his eyes narrowing under the brim of a faded cap. "Sounds like Harlan's been at it again," he muttered, glancing at Ethan. Heard whispers, crooked deals with the county, buying up land cheap, running good people off. Lena wiped down the bar nearby, her sharp gaze flicking over, but she stayed silent, her presence a steady force. She'd seen too many stories like this unfold in the saloon's dim corners, families fractured by greed, the road's nomads stepping in when the law turned a blind eye. Ethan leaned forward, the leather of his vest creaking softly. "What kind of threats?" he asked, his tone even, but laced with the gravel of restrained fury. Olivia swallowed, pulling a crumpled envelope from her backpack, its edges frayed like her nerves. She slid it across the table. Inside was a typed notice, stark and cold. Eviction in 7 days. No appeals, but scrawled in the margin, in red ink. "Pay or pay the price. You know what happened to the last ones who fought." The crew exchanged looks, a ripple of understanding passing like a shared current. Harlan wasn't just a landlord. He was a shadow over the highway towns, his influence tangled with local officials who looked the other way for a cut. Ethan remembered a ride 2 years back, pulling over to help a family much like this one, only to find Harlan's men lurking, enforcing with intimidation rather than ink. The iron promise had stared them down then, engines roaring in warning, but it had cost them. A slashed tire here, a false report there. Loyalty bound them, but so did caution. The road forgave no fools. Olivia's eyes met Ethan's, pleading without words. "I didn't know where else to go. Dad always said the riders with the eagles. They keep their word. He rode with you once, back when you saved that convoy from the flash flood. Said you were the kind of man who turned strangers into family." The weight of it hit Ethan like a crosswind, stirring the ghosts he'd tried to leave in rearview mirrors, his own losses, the wife's laughter silenced by twisted metal, the son's letters gone unanswered, mirrored hers in ways that cut deep. But this was different. This was a chance to mend what time had frayed, to honor the vow before it became another regret, etched into his soul. He pushed the envelope back gently, his calloused hand covering hers for a brief, reassuring moment. "We ride for promises like that," Ethan said, the words carrying the finality of a key, turning in an ignition. The booth seemed to shrink as the crew closed in tighter, Jax cracking his knuckles, Lena nodding once, sharp and decisive. Outside, lightning cracked the sky, illuminating the rows of Harleys lined up like sentinels, their chrome gleaming wetly. "First light, we head to your place," Ethan continued. "Assess the lay. No charging in blind, that's how you end up in a ditch." But as Olivia nodded, relief softening the lines of her face, a shadow fell across the table. The trucker from earlier hovered nearby, his earlier bluster replaced by a sly leer, phone in hand as if he'd been listening. "Bikers playing hero. Harlan won't like that. He's got friends in high places, sheriff's office, the works." He chuckled, low and mocking, before turning away, but the warning lingered, thick as the storm's humidity. Ethan watched him go, a plan forming in the quiet spaces of his mind. This wasn't just about one girl anymore. It was a thread pulling at the fabric of their world, exposing the rot beneath the desert's sun-baked surface. As the night deepened, the saloon's energy shifted, from idle chatter to purposeful whispers. Maps were pulled from pockets, routes sketched on napkins stained with beer rings. Olivia sat among them, No longer a stranger, but a spark igniting the old fire of brotherhood. Ethan stepped outside for a moment, the rain cooling his skin as he lit a cigarette, the flame flickering against the wind. The promise he'd made years ago wasn't dead. It roared back to life, demanding he lead the ride. By dawn, the iron promise would roll, not as outlaws but as guardians, their engines a thunderous vow against the darkness closing in. And in that thunder, hearts long hardened by the road began to melt, forged anew in the heat of unyielding loyalty. The first rays of dawn sliced through the storm clouds like hesitant blades, painting the desert horizon in hues of bruised purple and gold. The Iron Eagle saloon stood quiet now, its neon signs dimmed, but the parking lot thrummed with life as engines coughed to life one by one. Olivia stood beside Ethan's weathered Harley, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the hood of her sweatshirt pulled up against the lingering chill. The air smelled of wet asphalt and fresh brewed coffee from Lena's thermos, passed around like a ritual among the riders. 8 bikes in total, the core of the iron promise who'd answered the unspoken call, idled in a loose formation, their exhaust a low growl that vibrated through the gravel. Ethan swung his leg over the saddle, the leather seat creaking under his weight, and glanced at Olivia. "Climb on," he said, patting the space behind him. She hesitated, her scarred hands twisting the strap of her bag, but the warmth in his eyes, steady, unyielding, eased the knot in her chest. For the first time in months, the road ahead didn't feel like an endless void. Jax revved his own bike nearby, a nod of encouragement flashing across his grease-streaked face, while Lena, ever the anchor, handed Olivia a spare helmet. "Hold tight, kid. We've got your back." The convoy rolled out as one, tires humming over the cracked highway, the desert unfolding like a vast, silent witness. Dust devils swirled in their wake, kicked up by the wind that whispered through the canyons. Olivia clung to Ethan's waist, the rumble of the engine sinking with her heartbeat, carrying her away from the saloon's shadows toward the trailer park on the town's ragged outskirts. Memories flickered with each mile, her father's stories of the road, how he'd ridden with men like these, bound by codes stronger than law. Ethan rode point, his broad back a shield, the eagle patch on his vest catching the light like a talisman. The trailer park emerged from the haze, a cluster of rusted metal boxes huddled against the sun-bleached earth, chain-link fences sagging like weary sentinels. Olivia's home was at the far end, a faded blue unit with peeling paint and a porch light that buzzed faintly even in daylight. As they pulled up, engines cutting to a hush, the neighborhood stirred. Curtains twitched in neighboring windows, faces peering out, tired eyes that had seen too many evictions, too many families scattered like tumbleweeds. A woman's voice called from across the way, soft but urgent. "Olivia? That you?" Before Olivia could respond, the screen door of her trailer swung open. Her mother, Clara, stepped out, her frame frail under a threadbare shawl, coughs rattling in her chest like loose gravel. The smoke from that long-ago fire had left its mark deeper than scars, lungs scarred inside, breath a labored whisper. She froze at the sight of the bikes, her eyes widening, but then recognition dawned as Olivia rushed forward, wrapping her in a hug. "Mom, these are the riders, the ones Dad talked about. They're here to help." Clara's gaze shifted to Ethan, who dismounted with deliberate calm, removing his helmet to reveal the lines of a face that had weathered its own storms. "You," she breathed, stepping closer, her hand trembling as she reached out. "The man from the fire. We thought you'd forgotten." Ethan's throat tightened, the old promise surfacing like a tide. He took her hand gently, the skin paper-thin. "Never forgot, Mom, just took too long to find my way back." The words hung between them, heavy with the years unspoken, and in that moment the air thickened with something profound. a bridge rebuilt from embers. The crew fanned out subtly, Jax checking the trailer's undercarriage for tampering while Lena helped Clara inside, her arm a steady support. But the piece shattered like fragile glass when a black SUV rumbled into the lot, tires crunching over the dirt. Two men climbed out, broad-shouldered types in cheap suits, Harlan's enforcers by the look of their scowls and the holsters barely concealed under jackets. The leader, a stocky figure with a jaw like chiseled stone, eyed the bikes with disdain. "Morning, folks. This is private property. Eviction's in effect. Pack up and go, or we'll make it official." Olivia tensed beside Ethan, her fingers digging into her palms. But he stepped forward, his presence a quiet wall. "Official? Like those notes with threats scrawled in red. We know Harlan's game, squeezing folks out for his developments, bribing officials to look away." The man's smirk faltered, but he puffed up, hand drifting toward his belt. "You threatening us, biker? Harlan owns this town. One call, and you're all in cuffs for trespassing." Tension coiled like a spring, the desert wind picking up, carrying the faint scent of sage and impending dust. Jax moved to flank Ethan, his wiry frame taut, while the other riders formed a loose circle, engines off but ready. No weapons drawn, just the unspoken weight of their brotherhood, a force that had stared down worse than petty thugs. Clara watched from the doorway, her cough subdued, eyes fierce with a mother's fire. "We've paid what we could," she called out, voice cutting through the standoff. "My husband died keeping his word to men like you. Don't make us fight for scraps." The enforcer hesitated, glancing at his partner, who shifted uneasily under the collective gaze of the iron promise. Ethan's voice dropped low, carrying the rumble of conviction. "Tell Harlan we're not leaving, not till this is square. Promises like the one he broke, they don't die easy." The words landed like a gauntlet, and after a beat, the men backed toward the SUV, muttering radio calls that crackled with frustration. The vehicle peeled out, leaving a plume of dust that settled slowly, like the easing of a held breath. Inside the trailer, the air was close, laced with the musty scent of old books and herbal tea. Clara settled into a worn armchair, Olivia at her side, as the crew gathered in the cramped living room. Maps unrolled on the coffee table, hand-drawn routes to Harlan's office, notes on his dealings scribbled in margins. "He's got the sheriff in his pocket," Jax said, tracing a line with a grease-blackened finger. "But we've got eyes everywhere. Riders from the next chapter can watch the roads, cut off any surprises." Ethan nodded, but his mind turned inward, the morning light filtering through cracked blinds to highlight the faded photo on the wall, Olivia's father, young and grinning beside a bike, arm slung around a younger Ethan. The vow replayed, protect them, no matter the miles. His own regrets whispered, the crash that took his wife, the distance from his son, a chasm widened by the road's demands. Helping Olivia wasn't just duty, it was redemption, a chance to pull someone from the edge before they fell. As plans solidified, scout Harlan's compound at dusk, gather statements from other tenants, Lena caught Ethan's eye, her nod, a silent affirmation. The chosen family, forged in leather and loyalty, was mending what greed had torn. Olivia looked around the room, her scarred face softening, the fear in her eyes giving way to a tentative hope. Outside, the bikes waited, chrome glinting under the climbing sun, ready to carry them into the fray. But as the group dispersed to prepare, a distant engine roar echoed from the highway. More vehicles approaching, perhaps Harlan's response. The promise had stirred the hornet's nest, and the real test loomed, demanding not just strength, but the unyielding heart of honor. In the quiet before the storm, bonds deepened, hearts melting further in the fire of standing together. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert air into a shimmering haze that distorted the horizon like a fever dream. Inside the trailer, the meeting broke into focused murmurs, the creak of floorboards under shifting boots punctuating the air like hesitant heartbeats. Ethan stood by the window, his silhouette framed against the glare, watching the highway for signs of the approaching roar. The scent of stale coffee lingered, mingling with the faint medicinal tang from Clara's breathing treatment stacked on a side table. Olivia hovered near her mother, refilling a glass of water with hands that no longer shook quite so fiercely, the crew's presence weaving a fragile net of security around them. Jax unfolded a battered laptop on the coffee table, its screen casting a blue glow over the scattered maps. Harlan's office is 10 miles out, tucked behind that old mill by the riverbed. Fenced in, cameras everywhere, but I've got a buddy who owes me, says the back gate's got a blind spot after dark. His fingers flew over the keys, pulling up grainy satellite images that revealed the sprawl of Harlan's empire, warehouses squatting like hulking beasts, trailers lined up for demolition. Lena leaned in, her sharp eyes scanning the layout, while two other riders, Marcus, the club's steady navigator with a voice like rolling thunder, and Riley, a young vet whose quiet demeanor hid a tactical mind, nodded along, adding details from past runs. Clara coughed softly from her chair, the sound pulling all eyes her way. "He came here once, Harlan," she said, her voice a raspy whisper that cut through the room like a knife through silk. "After the fire, when we were rebuilding, offered help, loans with strings that'd choke you. My husband turned him down flat, said a man's word was worth more than any deal." Her eyes, faded but fierce, met Ethan's. "You pulled us from those flames that night. Saw the good in him, in us. Don't let that greed win now." Ethan felt the weight of her gaze, a mirror to his own buried pains, the crash that had stolen his wife, leaving him adrift on endless roads, the letters from his son gathering dust in a drawer. This fight wasn't abstract. It was a reckoning, pulling him from the numbness of survival into the fire of purpose. Outside, the distant engine growl resolved into a convoy of dust-caked pickups, 3 in total, barreling down the access road with aggressive purpose. They skidded to a halt at the trailer's edge, doors slamming like thunderclaps. Harlan himself stepped out of the lead vehicle, a man in his late 50s with a paunch straining against a tailored shirt, his face flushed red under a wide-brimmed hat, flanked by 4 more enforcers. Rough types with folded arms and narrowed eyes. He strode forward, the gravel crunching under polished boots that looked out of place in the dust. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice oily smooth, carrying over the idling engines. "Looks like the circus rolled in. Olivia, Clara, time's up, court's on my side, and these fine gentlemen are here to enforce it." Olivia stiffened, stepping to the doorway, but Ethan was already there, blocking the threshold like an unmovable oak. The crew fanned out behind him, a wall of leather and resolve, their bikes forming a silent barrier. No raised voices yet, just the tense hum of restrained energy, the wind tugging at vest patches like whispers of warning. "Harlan," Ethan said, his tone level, the gravel in his voice matching the ground beneath them. "We know your tricks, evictions without cause, threats that leave marks without fingerprints. This family's paid their dues. Time to call off your dogs." Harlan's laugh was short, bark-like, but his eyes darted to the bikes, calculating. "Promises? That's rich coming from a pack of road rats. This land's mine by right. Development's coming. Jobs for the town. You're in the way, biker. Step aside, or we'll do this the hard way." One enforcer shifted, hand hovering near a pocket, but Jax's glare pinned him, the mechanic's wiry frame coiled like a spring. The air thickened with the scent of hot metal from the truck's radiators, the sun beating down mercilessly, turning sweat into rivulets on exposed skin. Clara pushed herself up, leaning on Olivia for support, her shawl slipping to reveal arms thinned by illness. "You took enough from us that night," she said, her words steady despite the wheeze. "The fire wasn't accident. Your crew cut corners on that wiring to force us out early. My husband knew, confronted you. Now you finish what you started." The accusation hung, a spark in dry tinder. Harlan's face tightened, a flicker of unease breaking his facade. Whispers had circulated for years, shoddy maintenance, ignored complaints, but proof was buried under layers of influence and silence. Ethan seized the moment, pulling a small recorder from his vest pocket, its red light blinking. "We've got statements from your other tenants, Harlan, patterns that don't add up. One call to the right ears, and your friends in the county start sweating." It was a bluff edged with truth. Marcus had spent the morning compiling notes from shaken neighbors, voices too afraid to speak alone, but emboldened now. The landlord's bluff cracked further, his enforcers exchanging uneasy glances as the distant wail of a siren echoed, perhaps a patrol car, or just the wind playing tricks. Harlan raised a hand, stalling. "This ain't over. You think a few oaths change the game? I'll bury you in paperwork, liens, whatever it takes." But as he turned back to his truck, the crew held their ground, a united front that spoke louder than shouts. Olivia watched him go, the tension easing from her shoulders like a released breath, her scarred hand finding Ethan's arm in silent thanks. Inside, as the pickups retreated in a swirl of dust, plans evolved, deeper reconnaissance, alliances with local advocates who'd long chafed under Harlan's thumb. Lena brewed fresh tea, the steam rising like a veil, while Riley sketched escape routes on a notepad. Bonds solidified in the aftermath, stories shared in low tones. Ethan's war tales, Clara's quiet strength, Olivia's dreams of a life unscarred by loss. The afternoon waned, shadows lengthening across the trailer park like fingers reaching for dusk. Ethan stepped out alone, lighting a cigarette against the fading light, the smoke curling upward in lazy spirals. The promise that had drawn him here pulsed stronger now, a beacon against the encroaching night. Harlan's retreat was temporary. The real storm brewed, testing not just their loyalty, but the very soul of what it meant to stand for the forgotten. In the quiet, hearts continued to melt, forged in the unbreaking fire of chosen family and honor reclaimed. If this chapter's stirring something in you, take a moment to hit that like button. It helps these stories of quiet courage reach more hearts out there on the road. The twilight bled across the desert like spilled ink, turning the trailer park into a mosaic of lengthening shadows and flickering porch lights. Inside Clara's home, the air hummed with the low buzz of a single fan pushing against the evening's sticky warmth, its blades stirring the scent of cooling earth and the faint herbal residue of her medications. Ethan paced the narrow living room, his boots leaving faint imprints on the threadbare carpet, while the crew huddled around the coffee table, now cluttered with printed emails, scribbled witness accounts, and a thermos of Lena's strong black coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Olivia sat cross-legged on the floor, her scarred fingers tracing patterns on a faded rug, her eyes distant but no longer hollow, fueled by the spark of alliance that had taken root. Jax leaned back against the wall, arms folded, his cap pulled low over eyes that gleamed with calculated fire. Harlan's rattled, but he's not done. That bluff with the recorder bought us time, but he'll hit back harder, maybe stir up the sheriff for real this time. Marcus nodded, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder as he tapped a photo on his phone, a grainy shot of Harlan shaking hands with a uniformed figure outside the county office. "Got this from a contact. Sheriff's nephew works security for him. If we push, they push back, with badges, not just fists." The words hung heavy, a reminder of the thin line they walked. Guardians of the road, not vigilantes, bound by a code that demanded justice without descending into the chaos they fought. Ethan stopped pacing, his broad frame silhouetted against the window where the last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon. The day's confrontation replayed in his mind. The oily slide of Harlan's voice, the enforcer's uneasy retreat, Clara's unyielding stand. It stirred the old ghosts. His wife's final breath in that mangled wreck, the promise he'd whispered to her fading form, "I'll keep going, for us." The road had been his penance, the iron promise his confessional, but Olivia's arrival had cracked the armor, forcing him to confront how far he'd drifted from the man who'd sworn to protect the broken. "We don't charge in," he said finally, his gravelly tone cutting through the murmurs. "We build the case, gather more voices, expose the rot. That's how we honor the vow, not with engines roaring blind." Clara shifted in her armchair, the springs creaking softly under her frail weight. A knitted blanket draped over her knees like a shield. She looked at Ethan with eyes that held the quiet wisdom of survival. Her cough subdued but ever present, a raspy echo of the fire's lingering curse. "My husband believed in you because you saw the truth in the flames, not just the destruction, but what rose from it. Harlan's fear today? That's the start. But be careful. Greed like his twists everything it touches." Olivia reached for her mother's hand, their fingers intertwining, a silent bridge across the scars they both bore, one visible, the other woven into every labored breath. Outside, the night deepened, stars pricking the velvet sky like distant promises. The crew dispersed into pairs, engines purring to life in hushed tones to avoid drawing eyes. Lena and Riley headed to the neighboring trailers, knocking softly on doors to coax stories from the shadows, tales of hiked rents, ignored repairs, families vanishing into the night under Harlan's pressure. Jax and Marcus rode scout toward the old mill, their taillights fading into the dark like fireflies on a mission. Ethan stayed behind with Olivia, with the trailer falling into a companionable quiet, broken only by the fan's whir and the occasional distant howl of coyotes. As Olivia cleared the table, stacking mugs with careful precision, she glanced at Ethan, her voice tentative, but threaded with newfound steel. "Why do this? For us, I mean, strangers pulling you into our mess." He met her gaze, the lines around his eyes deepening in the lamplight. The weight of unspoken losses pressing like the desert's endless expanse. "Because I know what it's like to lose your anchor. My wife, gone in a blink on a stretch of road, not much different from this, left me with a son I barely see, promises I half kept. Your dad gave me a chance to be better that night. It's me making it right." The confession hung between them, raw and unadorned, melting another layer of the wall he'd built. Olivia nodded, a small smile touching her scarred lips, the first real one since the saloon. "Then we're even. Family's not just blood, it's who shows up when the fire comes." The peace shattered around midnight, when headlights pierced the trailer's thin curtains like accusatory fingers. A single patrol car rolled up, its red and blue lights pulsing silently, no siren, but the authority was clear. The sheriff himself stepped out, a lanky man in his 50s with a mustache like steel wool and eyes hardened by years of looking the other way. He approached the door with measured steps, badge glinting under the porch light, while two deputies lingered by the vehicle, hands resting casually near their belts. Ethan rose, signaling Olivia to stay back, and opened the door, the cool night air rushing in with the scent of sage and engine oil. "Sheriff Tate," Ethan greeted, his stance relaxed but unyielding, a subtle barrier in the doorway. The man tipped his hat, but there was no warmth in it. Harlan called, said there's a disturbance, bikers harassing tenants, maybe even threats. Got reports of illegal gatherings. His voice was even, but the implication coiled like smoke. Clara appeared behind Ethan, her presence a quiet force, while Olivia peered from the hallway, heart pounding against her ribs. "We've got no disturbances," Ethan replied, his tone steady as the road at dawn. "Just folks talking about fair treatment. You know Harlan's playbook. Evictions that smell like payoffs, families pushed out for his pockets." Tate's eyes narrowed, flicking past Ethan to the women inside, calculating. This town's got rules, Harlan. Iron promise or not, you stir up trouble, I shut it down. Harlan's a businessman. You're outsiders meddling. The word Harlan landed like a spark, Ethan's own surname. A coincidence that twisted like fate, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the moral line drawn in the dust. Clara stepped forward then, her voice frail but piercing. Rules? Like the ones that let a fire start from bad wiring, then bury the truth? My husband's gone because of men like him and you. The sheriff shifted, discomfort flickering across his face. The weight of her words chipping at his resolve. Whispers of that old incident had haunted the county for years, a ghost Harlan had never fully exorcised. Tate cleared his throat, glancing at his deputies. No proof, ma'am, but I'll look into it, unofficially. It was a concession, small but seismic, bought by the unbreaking front of loyalty. As the patrol car pulled away, lights off now, the trailer exhaled. Ethan closed the door, the click echoing like a vow sealed. The crew trickled back soon after, reports filtering in, more tenants willing to sign affidavits, a weak spot in Harlan's fence confirmed. But the sheriff's visit was a warning. The web tightened, corruption's threads pulling at their edges. Ethan gathered them under the dim bulb, maps refolded with new marks. Dawn, ride to the mill. We expose him clean, or we walk away with nothing. Nods rippled through the room, bonds forged tighter in the crucible of the night. Olivia watched from the sidelines, the fear in her chest transmuting to resolve, her scars no longer just marks of loss but badges of endurance. Outside, the bike stood sentinel, chrome whispering under the stars, ready for the final push. The promise that had begun in a rain-soaked bar now burned bright, a beacon against the gathering dark, hearts melting into unbreakable unity as the road called them forward. The first blush of dawn crept over the desert like a reluctant confession, gilding the trailer park in soft amber light that chased away the night's chill. Engines rumbled to life in a symphony of low growls. The Iron Promise crew, mounting their Harleys with the quiet precision of men and women who knew the road's unforgiving truths. Ethan adjusted his helmet, the leather of his gloves creaking as he glanced at Olivia, who stood ready with a borrowed jacket zipped tight against the morning breeze. Her scarred face, illuminated by the rising sun, held a resolve that mirrored the horizon's unyielding line, no longer shadowed by fear, but etched with the fire of those who'd chosen to stand. Clara watched from the porch, her frail hand raised in a wave that carried the weight of quiet gratitude, her cough muffled by the shawl at her throat. "Bring back what's right," she whispered to the wind, her eyes locking on Ethan's one last time. He nodded, the gesture heavy with the promises that bound them all, then swung onto his bike. Olivia climbed on behind him, her arms wrapping around his waist, the vibration of the engine syncing with the steady beat of her heart. The convoy, 8 strong, led by Ethan's broad silhouette, rolled out in formation, tires whispering over the dew-kissed asphalt, leaving a trail of dust that swirled like fading doubts. The highway unfurled before them, a ribbon of cracked black, cutting through sagebrush and distant mesas, the air crisp with the scent of creosote and cooling earth. Jax rode flank, his wiry frame leaning into the curves, while Lena brought up the rear, her steady presence an anchor in the flow. Marcus and Riley scouted ahead on lighter scouts, their taillights flickering like signals in the half-light. Ethan felt the road's pull, a familiar ache that stirred memories. The flash flood years ago, when he'd first ridden with Olivia's father. Oaths sworn under pouring skies. That bond had frayed under time's relentless miles, but now it reformed, stronger, pulling him toward redemption's edge. 10 miles blurred by, in a haze of wind-whipped faces and the rhythmic thrum of exhaust. The old mill loomed at the riverbed's bend, a skeletal relic of rusted iron and weathered brick, its silhouette jagged against the paling sky. Harlan's compound squatted behind it, fenced in chain link topped with barbed wire, floodlights humming faintly, warehouses hulking like silent guardians. The crew cut engines at the perimeter, the sudden silence amplifying the distant rush of the dry river and the faint clink of metal settling in the breeze. They dismounted, boots crunching on gravel, and gathered in the shadow of a derelict silo, voices low as Jax pulled binoculars from his saddlebag. "Blind spots holding," Marcus murmured, his deep timbre blending with the dawn's hush. "Gates unmanned. Riley's contact jammed the cameras for an hour. We slip in quiet. Hit the office. Affidavits and that recorder, enough to light a fire under the county." Ethan scanned the layout, the eagle patch on his vest catching a stray beam of light, a symbol of the loyalty that had drawn them here. No guns, no fury, just truth as their weapon, honor as their shield. Olivia stayed close, her breath steady, the crew's circle enfolding her like chosen kin. They moved as one, shadows slipping through the gap in the fence, the air thick with the metallic tang of rust and the underlying rot of neglect. The main building's door yielded to a gentle push, unlocked in Harlan's arrogance, and they entered a dimly lit corridor. Fluorescent buzz overhead, casting harsh pools of light on linoleum floors, scarred by years of hurried feet. Whispers guided them to the office at the end, door ajar, the glow of a desk lamp spilling out like spilled secrets. Inside, Harlan hunched over papers, his paunch casting a long shadow, unaware until Ethan's bootfall echoed like judgment. He spun in his chair, face paling under the wide-brimmed hat, eyes darting to the figures filling the doorway, leather vests, determined stares, Olivia's scarred resolve at Ethan's side. "You!" he snarled, rising too quickly, chair scraping like a cornered animal. "Trespassing? Breaking and entering? I'll have you all locked up by noon." But his bluster faltered as Ethan placed the recorder on the desk, its blinking light a silent accusation, followed by a folder thick with tenant statements. Voices of the displaced, patterns of coercion laid bare. "Game's over, Harlan," Ethan said, his voice a low rumble that filled the room, steady as the desert wind. "The fire that took her father, your wiring, your shortcuts to clear the land early. We dug, emails, maintenance logs buried in your files. And these," he tapped the folder, "evictions without cause, bribes to look away. The sheriff's already hearing it from folks who won't stay silent anymore." Olivia stepped forward, her chin lifted, the scars on her cheek a badge in the lamplight. "You tried to bury us. But promises like my dad's? They rise." Harlan's hands trembled as he snatched the folder, flipping through pages that unraveled his web. Proof of shoddy deals, threats veiled as business. Sweat beaded on his brow, the room's air growing stale with his panic, the distant hum of awakening machinery outside a mocking underscore. "This is nothing!" He spat, but his voice cracked, the facade crumbling like dry adobe. Jax leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. While Lena's sharp gaze pinned him, the crew's united front an unbreakable wall. No violence, just the inexorable weight of truth, pressing until he slumped back, defeated. By mid-morning, the county vans arrived, investigators tipped by anonymous calls, badges flashing under the climbing sun. Harlan was led away in cuffs, his empire fracturing in the light of exposure, the mill's shadows no longer his refuge. The crew watched from their bikes, engines idling like patient guardians, as Clara arrived in a borrowed car, her frail form bolstered by Olivia's arm. Tears traced clean paths down her cheeks, not of sorrow, but release. The fire's ghosts finally laid to rest, justice a quiet balm on old wounds. Ethan dismounted, pulling Clara into a brief enveloping hug, the scent of leather and sage mingling with her herbal aura. "Your husband's word held," he murmured, the vow complete, his own scars, the crash's echo, the sun's distant silence, eased by the mending. Olivia hugged him next, fierce and grateful, her voice a whisper against the wind. "You gave us family when we had none." The crew gathered, hands clasping shoulders, laughter breaking through like sunlight-piercing clouds. Jax's thunderous chuckle, Lena's knowing smile, Marcus and Riley sharing nods of hard-won victory. As the convoy formed up one last time, rolling back toward the highway, the desert stretched endless and forgiving, the air alive with the promise of new miles. Hearts that had hardened on lonely roads now melted fully, forged in the unyielding fire of loyalty and redemption. The iron promise rode on, not as wanderers, but as bearers of honor, their engines a lasting echo of oaths kept against the odds. Thank you for riding along on this journey of unbreakable promises and chosen hearts. If these stories of quiet courage resonate with you, hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales from the road. We'd be honored to have you in the crew.